My name is Ray Owen. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist and a health psychologist. And throughout my career, my interest has always been in the sort of the impact of physical health problems, disabilities, rather than sort of what you might call pure mental health, or obviously massive overlaps for absolutely all of us. And in the course of that, I've got involved in a few different working with people with a range of different conditions, and this is me up front saying I don't hold any expertise in your condition. You have lots of expertise between you and lots of experience. What I'm here to talk about is an approach that seems to help across a wide range of different difficulties, and I'll hope that as you're sitting there, you're beginning to think, how would that match for me? How would that work for in my situation? No, that bit doesn't seem to. And equally, lots of the things I'm going to talk about, I don't know any of you. I've had a chance to chat somewhat with Adam. Some of you may be laps ahead of me on this. Some of you may already be very involved in one or more of the things I'm talking about here. So apologies if I'm teaching you to suck eggs at all. But when we were lining up what might be useful to talk about this afternoon, one of the starting points really we felt would be talking about mindfulness, because it's, as we'll come back to in a second, it's kind of out there everywhere. Everybody's talking about it. You see it in the newspapers, on the television, and through physical and mental health services, stuff is often being offered. So while some of you may already be very there with it, either in terms of being involved and having some practice of your own already, or equally having had some contact with it and decided that's really not for me, we just thought it would be useful to have to spend a little time talking through, for those who are less familiar particularly, what it is, how it might apply here. But rather than just purely talk about the mindfulness bit, I thought it would be quite useful to talk about how we use it, and one particular way of using it, an approach I'm very much involved with, which goes under different names, like sometimes called the psychological flexibility approach. Sometimes people might have heard of something called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. And in that, we use basically mindfulness type techniques, but very much alongside other principles. And two of the big ones there are the acceptance bit and talking about values. So the goal for talking for sort of, I think we said like half an hour or 40 minutes or something today, really would just be about giving you a flavour of that, and taking any questions at the end that people are interested in. At the end of this talk, I'll also point you in a couple of directions that if you wanted to learn more, you easily could. And I'll make sure that the links that I've put on my slides here are also available to Adam to put up on the website. Then you don't have to retype long YouTube strings just to get the video that I'd like you to have the chance to see. So all of that being said, let's move on to the first bit. And the first bit really is talking about mindfulness as a concept, and it, given how much it is around in the ether these days, it does seem strange remembering only a few years ago doing a big teaching session for doctors and nurses, and afterwards somebody coming up and saying, I was really interested in what you were talking about, and I'd like to learn more about this mind fungus that you were talking about. And it just took me a few moments to work out what on earth they meant. But yeah, mindfulness with a northern accent, I guess, is the answer. And it is everywhere, in different kinds of ways. So, we might see images associated with it. For some reason, stacks of pebbles in scenic locations are kind of an image that goes very much with that. You might see classes advertised locally. It's been used in schools. And it even filters through as far as things like, the right hand side, the mindfulness colouring book. And incidentally, I'm not going to kind of trash that as an idea. I think there could be real benefits to some of that, but we will come back to when it is and when it isn't sort of so much mindfulness. So it's kind of all out there. It's reasonable to say, what is it and where did it come from? Well, ultimately where it comes from is from a variety of sort of Eastern philosophies and sort of faiths or religious movements. I mean, most notably Buddhism. It actually predates Buddhism and almost certainly comes from early Hinduism, but lots of other approaches, lots of other isms have had a strong element of this. And completely separately, there are bits in more Western traditions. So in kind of Christianity and Islam and things that aren't quite the same, but overlap a lot historically. So this is a thing that keeps getting discovered in one way or another. But, it's worth naming up front that this is kind of where it comes from, even though we are now using it slightly differently in a modern secular Western medical healthcare. And the guy who's most associated with it coming across is somebody called Jon Kabat Zinn. So Jon Kabat Zinn was a kind of high-flying biochemistry researcher who, after a while, at that kind of top of his field, sort of went off. I suspect this was in the 60s, sort of went off to try and find himself in Southeast Asia, and became very interested in Buddhism and spent 10 years on the side of a mountain with a master and became a Zen master himself and spent more time there, and then came to the conclusion that maybe he could do more good in the world back where he started from than on that mountain. So he came back in order to go back to biochemistry and help sort of try and find cures for illnesses. But while he was doing that in a hospital in Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Medical Center, Worcester, he came across the fact that amidst all this sort of trying to find new treatments, new cures, the realization that for lots of people, there was no cure. And lots of people were having to live with significant physical, and then he expanded into mental health difficulties that medicine did not have an answer to and probably wasn't going to anytime really soon. And realizing that was incredibly difficult for the people who were doing it. And for some of the doctors who were treating them said that was the thing that they just had nothing to offer. And he at that point said, well, actually, the tradition I come from does have some things to say with how you can put up with suffering that's not going away. I wonder if maybe without the whole Buddhism thing, there's this bit of it that we use to try and help deal with pain, adversity, the knowledge that you're going to die, all that kind of stuff. This principle of mindfulness, I wonder if we could just take that bit out, try it with people and see if it kind of helps them at all, which is what he did. And, being a scientific kind of a guy, he set up sort of groups and tested whether it seemed to help people. It did seem to help people, and it's kind of spread out there massively since. So he did all that, and he wrote a best-selling book on it called Full Catastrophe Living, and a man who's not averse to posing for a cheesy publicity shot, as you can see. He's still around, and he's still an amazing guy to listen to. And as I'll be recommending at the end, in most cases, any of these things worth listening to, you can find them on something like YouTube. So it's very easy to find Jon Kabat Zinn talks on YouTube. He's an interesting blog to listen to. Okay, so that's kind of how it came into Western secular, like non-religious settings. And it's kind of spread there, and sort of new variations have come up, and that's why it's kind of widespread at the moment. But it's all very well saying all this, but I haven't said what mindfulness is. Well, he actually offered one of the kind of most commonly used definitions of mindfulness, which I've slightly misworded because some of how he words it occasionally gets misunderstood, but this is basically what he was saying. He says mindfulness is paying attention, but in a particular way. First off, a way that it's on purpose. Okay, so if a loud noise goes off on one side or a delicious smell of cooking goes on the other side, our attention will be captured by that and we'll orient to it, we'll move and look at it. And that's what kind of attention's there for, picking up important things in our environment. That's not quite what we're talking about here. We're talking about here paying attention and choosing what you're paying attention to, rather than just reacting to your environment and allowing your attention to be drawn. So it's paying attention on purpose and to the present moment. So we're not talking about paying attention to something that happened last week, or something you're hoping will happen next week, or even typically something that might be happening somewhere else. It's very much paying attention to something that's here and now. And then the third bit is paying attention in a way that is about noticing rather than thinking about. Okay, so what I mean by that is, if, as in a lot of mindfulness practices, there might be a bit of it where you say, pay attention to your breath, you know, while you're breathing, just pay attention to your breathing in and out. Then what we're aiming for is much more about noticing what it feels like for your chest to be opening and closing, what it feels like for air to be entering your nose or your mouth or up and out, noticing the fact that your tummy moves a bit when you're breathing. That, more than sitting there thinking, I wonder if my breathing is easier or harder than last week. I wonder what my oxygen saturation levels are. Why does it feel so difficult when you're having to wear a mask out and about? Gosh, I wonder, you know, I wonder if my kind of that what's the name of that bit of muscle? Is it called a diaphragm? Can you hear that's thinking about? And that's important stuff for minds to do, but in mindfulness, it will still happen. But what we're aiming for is that when that happens, we come back to just noticing instead, and we keep doing that time and time again. So that, in its simple form, is what we mean by mindfulness, paying attention in this particular way and doing it both as a, typically we'd be saying, doing it as a practice that we do maybe even every day for a period of time, and as well as using this to learn to react differently to our world. So obviously that kind of, as I said, has come up through kind of religious and spiritual traditions. So ways that people learn that, well, still, you know, if you look up, if you Google sort of mindfulness classes near me, then one category of that would be within, say, your local Buddhist center. So you're learning that in a kind of a spiritual context like that. But of course, what I've been involved with is in healthcare settings, where we think the same active ingredient is at play, but there's some elements of it that we don't pay attention to. You know, the many, many wider lessons of things like Buddhism. We're not into sort of talking about karma or rebirth or any of those things that Buddhists believe in are an important part of their faith. We're talking about this bit, this paying attention, because we think it has certain benefits in living our lives. So that's another kind of context. And of course, in this modern world we live in, online is the other way that people may very well learn these things. And I'll show you links at the end for places if you wanted to have a little sample at it, you could. But that's of course talking about formal classes where you are learning and you're learning from a teacher. What we are talking about in mindfulness isn't really an invention of anybody. It's almost certainly a naturally occurring state. It's a thing we all do at some times. You know, so I suppose the most obvious example of that is something sometimes referred to as flow. So if you think about people like rock climbers, right? Well, they are very much paying attention when they're climbing, hopefully. And they are paying attention on purpose because they know how important it is to pay attention. They are definitely paying attention to the present moment. You know, if you're going up a tricky bit of a rock face, you don't want to be thinking, I wonder who else has climbed this. What am I going to have for my tea tonight? You know, that's probably unhealthy. And thinking, I wonder if this is igneous or calciferous rock versus that handhold doesn't feel quite strong enough. Gosh, these hands are feeling a bit sweaty. I need a bit more chalk on them. So can you see it's kind of, it's the same qualities that we're talking about, but naturally occurring. And, you know, none of you may be in a position, so easy a position to go rock climbing. I don't, it's never been my thing. But it's true of other things as well. Painting, people often talk about losing themselves and losing the concept of time. when they're doing it. And they're probably in a state that we could call flow, and we can certainly call mindfulness. And we can also have mindful gardening as well. All of these show a really important point. And remember, I showed you that sort of mindfulness colouring book at the beginning, of which there's stocks. Somebody told me, the publishing industry, certainly up to COVID, had been going through really hard times. People don't buy books anymore. And there's actually been a resurgence in publications of books, physical books, in the 2 years before. And it turns out it was almost entirely due to the increased number of adult colouring books that were being sold. They're that popular because people get a lot of stuff out of them. And so, and this is absolutely not me knocking them. I just want to make a point about them, which is you can do the colouring in and it can be an intensely mindful experience. You're just there seeing the colours, holding the pen, noticing where the colour comes up to the edge. And that could be an intensely mindful experience. But you could also be doing that and thinking about stuff and worrying about stuff and wondering what's going to happen next. And just like gardening can be really mindful if you're noticing the feeling of your hand in the soil, and you're noticing the way the sun's playing on the plant in front of you, and you're noticing the speckling. That's a very mindful experience. But if you're anything like me, you can also garden whilst, in my case, I'm really guilty of this, listening to an audiobook or Test Match Special on the radio. Or I can be sort of fantasizing about the argument I had last week, and could I bury my boss here? Would anybody notice? Well, that's not very mindful. So what I'm saying is the mindfulness sits in the way that you're doing something and what's happening with your mind while you're doing it. It's not in the behavior. Coloring is not intrinsically mindful. And you know what? Sitting in full lotus position like this, isn't itself mindfulness. It would only be mindfulness if you were doing it, paying attention to the present moment, noticing what's happening with your thoughts and so on. And that's the same is true of these other actions as well. I should also point out, as well as in these sort of naturally occurring situations, there are other like traditions and activities that are almost certainly a big chunk of them about mindfulness. So if we think of things like Tai Chi, which is this kind of rhythmic set of movements, which is incredibly popular in Japan, in China, and very popular with people as very, very old people as well, that you see doing it in parks. And this is about your mind being completely in the movements that you're making in this present moment. Obviously, what goes with that is yoga. So both of those could be termed as sort of mindful movement. Thing is, whenever you get an image for yoga, it tends to have this kind of very tendency to very idealized images of the person who is capable of doing it, the sort of the beautiful person who is doing it in the beautiful setting. It's really important to just remind ourselves that things like yoga, properly done, can be absolutely for everyone, for all sort of body shapes, and for all levels of physical difficulty. Obviously, particularly one might need specialist guidance if you have particular physical health problems, but there are specialist yoga teachers who can advise on virtually any adaptation to virtually any set of problems. So you can see it kind of permeates lots of things, and people are using it a lot. That the fact that it's out there that much also slightly explains what has also happened, which has been, more recently, kind of a bit of a backlash. And there's two main sort of threads to that. The first of which is, has mindfulness been diluted past the point of being useful? So in taking it out of these 2,500-year-old spiritual tradition, where it's like knitted into a whole set of attitudes and approaches and philosophies, and just like ripping this one bit out, have we kind of reduced its usefulness? It's what's sometimes called the McMindfulness argument, that what we're doing, if I give you a colouring book and say do it this way, actually that doesn't really get you the benefit that engagement with the full picture would. The other bit of this argument is that it is not unknown for example, employers to ask people to do the absolute impossible and to work very long hours under incredible stress. And rather than say, actually, you need to work fewer hours, or we need to give you a bit more money, we need to give you decent equipment and breaks. Tell you what, we'll set up a mindfulness class and that will solve it all. So my old employer, the NHS, a bit guilty of that at times. And the most extreme example of it, I guess, was Amazon, who, there may be people here who work for Amazon, so I apologize if I'm maligning your employer. But they certainly have a reputation for their distribution centers not being great places to work. And their solution to overworking people massively was to put in a little mindfulness pod, which you were allowed to use for 5 minutes in a week, and that would make everything all right. I would argue that's not actually a thing about mindfulness. That's a thing about how some people are choosing to use the word, rather than being a valid criticism of the thing itself. But yeah, we do have to be careful of that. The other one is it harmful? So there's been more talk about this in the last couple of years than there has before, because some people in going down this road have had unpleasant experiences once they've started really paying attention to what's going on inside them, their thoughts and their feelings. And certainly kind of you can see in the newspapers and things accounts of people saying, this was horrible for me. Well, we should say that when we're using it for people who are really struggling in life, some of the experience is beginning to notice this stuff and not hide from it anymore. So sometimes it is difficult, like any new thing you do is difficult. But in terms of actually being harmful, we think the level that I'm talking about here, we don't really have any data, any suggestion that people are actually harmed by doing these kind of like 15, 20-minute exercises that I'm talking about, where people really have. And there have been a handful of reliable reports of people having, more major problems. It's tended to be if they've said, okay, then their first step has been to go on a 10-day retreat in Thailand on the side of a mountain in heat and humidity, hardly eating, and for the first time spending 6 days in absolute silence. And unsurprisingly, some people it's been too much, and it's led to full-on psychotic breakdowns sometimes. And that's kind of like saying, I want to increase my activity, therefore I'm entering the London Marathon tomorrow. I'm climbing Everest tomorrow. So we're probably, if you're going to learn it somewhere reputable and you're doing it in manageable doses, we don't think there are risks attached to it. However, we need to keep an eye on this and check these things out. Okay, I'm not going to worry too much about all the detail of that. So I've told you kind of what it is. What are its aims? Well, often it's talked of in terms of calmness. And well, yes and no. Calmness doesn't mean the difficult stuff goes away. It doesn't mean the thoughts of, my health has deteriorated, what does the future hold? It doesn't vanish that thought. It's more like finding the eye of the storm sometimes. The storm's still swirling around you, but for these few minutes, I can sit and observe the storm and reset a little. I'm not kidding myself that I've made all that stuff go away. What it also does is it reduces the mind's tendency to wander. Right now, minds wander. They always do. And they tend to wander into the past and they wander into the future. And we know that the more a person's minds wander, the less happy they tend to be. Because when your mind wanders, sometimes it wanders to wonderful places, but often it wanders to trouble. So anything that's sort of training your mind to be a bit less prone to wandering may well yield benefits. It also, we think, reduces the tendency to have autopilot reactions to things. So as soon as you notice this, you're off. Or as soon as somebody says these words to you, you get furious. Well, mindfulness training seems to be able to introduce a little bit of a gap between we'd say a gap between the stimulus and the response. It gives you the chance to say, okay, wait, they've said that and I'm getting wound up. Right, what do I want to do next? They might still be shouted at them, but at least you've chosen, rather than it being an autopilot that you no longer have control of. And crucially, the central, the engine of this is getting better at noticing, having increased awareness as both a part of it and actually really the main mechanism for doing it, being just better at noticing stuff. Okay, are people still with me? People okay at this kind of pace? Okay, remember there is that chat thing. You may already have put questions and stuff in there. I'm not going to have it open because I've learned something about myself. If I see something arrive in the chat column, I lose mid-sentence and I end up reading it. So I've learned not to open it till the end. But if something horrible has happened, like my voice, like the sound's gone off, wave, because I can't see you. When you see me looking upwards on the screen, it's because that's where the panel of your face is just above my camera. Okay, bit of water. Okay, we're doing okay for time. So I've talked about it a lot. What I'd like to offer you, and again, some of you may be way ahead of me on this, but what I'd like to offer you is an entirely optional experience of it. So I'd like to spend 5 minutes actually doing some mindfulness. You absolutely don't have to do it. You can just sort of sit back and wonder what I'm doing, or, you know, I was going to say check the cricket score, but that's all over for the day. So, you know, you can opt out mentally if you want, or just be curious and notice what I'm doing, or you can give it a go. I'm completely happy either way. This is going to be less than 5 minutes of an experience. So if I cough all the way through, that's going to be really irritating. So let me just okay, so this is going to be very simple mindfulness experience. We are going to start off actually with our eyes open, because what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to look around the room and find something to look at. Okay, now I don't want it to be writing, I don't want it to be pictures, and I don't want it to be another person. So for instance, I'm looking at the corner of a light fitting. So I want you to find something fairly neutral in that way. I want you to look at it, and I want you to really look at it. Okay, I want you to look at what lines make it up. What color is it? But not just it's black, it's yellow. What are the gradations of color? Is it really one solid color? Where the light or shadow falls on it, does that make it different colors? Is it shiny or matte? Where are the edges of that thing and other things around it? And see if you can just kind of catch yourself. Notice, here I am, really paying attention to that thing. Okay, and now I'm going to ask you to let go of that. Bring your head back to the middle and get yourself in a nice, your neck in a comfortable position. And allow your eyes to close. If that feels too weird for you, that's okay. Just find a neutral spot and then let your eyes slip out of focus. But it's sometimes easier if you let your eyes close. And now I want you to listen. And really listen. Notice the tendency for your mind to reach out and name the things you're hearing. I think I'm hearing the dishwasher in another room. I think I hear kids playing in the street. Okay, that's a natural thing your mind does, but see if you can step back from that and just notice the sound. Is it high pitched or low? Varying or constant? Right here, right now, I'm hearing that. And now we'll switch our attention to touch. So I want you to notice some sensation of touch you're having. It might be clothing against your skin, one hand resting on the other, ground under your feet, doesn't matter what. See if you can sort of really pay attention to that. How big is this area of kind of pressure on you? How firm is the pressure? Are the edges really distinct, or does it kind of like fade out a bit? Right here, right now, I'm feeling that. And now we're going to switch your attention to your breath. Now, Not going to try and change anything about it. Just let your body get on with breathing. Let it do its thing. And just pay attention to the breath entering and leaving your body. Where are you feeling it? Is it in your nose and mouth? Is it in your chest? Is it in your belly as that moves forward and back a little bit to make room? Just notice, as if for the first time, what's this breath feel like? And keep paying attention to your breath. And what will happen, because it's already happened a dozen times, is your mind will wander. It will wander all over the place. That's natural. That's what minds do. They're kind of built to do that. That's not a problem. What we do is, when we're doing this, whatever your focus of attention is breath at the moment. When you realize your mind has wandered, notice where it's gone to, and then gently, firmly come back to this thing, this breath in this case. Oh, I was wondering about what I'm eating tonight. Okay, back to the breath. I'm just overwhelmed with boredom at this exercise. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Back to the breath. And then if this was a longer exercise, if this was a 10-minute exercise or 12 or 15 or something, we'd stay on the breath and we would practice getting better and better at noticing when our mind wanders. And if your mind wanders 1,000 times, that's brilliant, because that's 1,000 practices of noticing where your mind has gone and then choosing to come back to this present moment. But for now, let go of concentrating on the breath. And then when you're ready, you can let your eyes open or look back up at the screen. And then have a little stretch and a move, because even just for those 5 minutes we've spent, we've been kind of very still. Okay. If this was a longer thing and we were doing this in more depth, I'd be really, really curious about what your experience was, and I'd be asking you that. I'm aware that if we do that, that's probably the rest of the talk taken up. My suspicion is that your mind did wander, and that it probably wandered many times. And there might be a bit of your mind that then slapped yourself like, oh God, I've done it again. Wasn't meant to do that. What we would be teaching in mindfulness is, no, this is natural. We want to get good at spotting when your mind wanders and bringing it back. That's the active ingredient, actually. If somehow miraculously your mind only wandered once in 5 minutes, that would only be one practice. If your mind wanders 1,000 times in 5 minutes, that's 1,000 practices. That's way better. So doing mindfulness is not about being completely calm and your mind empty. It absolutely isn't. The way that we are using it is far more about learning to notice what's going on inside you and around you, and make choices about where you put your attention that then allow you to make the next step that suits you best. And in traditional sort of mindfulness approaches, again, go back to Jon Kabat Zinn, what he would say is, we weave our parachute every day. We don't wait to weave a parachute until the airplane's about to crash into the mountain. So you practice every day or most days a week, a few minutes of doing this, such that when you find yourself in turmoil or difficulty, your mind becomes very scattered, you've already got that there to fall back on, to say, wow, this is all getting a bit heavy. Come on, calm a little bit. Focus the mind, notice what's going through it. Okay, what do I do next? So most mindfulness traditions have some element of an idea of ongoing practice every day. Often as a way of setting yourself up for the day, actually. So, and it may well be that you already have such practices, some of you. Okay, let's carry on, because I'm aware of the time. It's so easy to end up being able to talk forever on this. So I do just want to touch on some of those other points that I mentioned before. You're here because of a physical health related problem, and a physical health related problem that brings difficulties into your life. Just like people might be here because of other things that bring difficulty into their lives. So one very, very reasonable question I get asked loads of time is, all this coming back to the present moment, noticing the present moment. Okay, but What if I don't like the present moment? Why would I want to come here? You know, what if I'm in pain today? Or what if I'm really tired today? Or what if my breath is short today? Or what if today is full of worry about my children or money or something? Why on earth would I come into the present moment? I mean, this is best illustrated by a question posed by one of the great philosophers when it comes to mindfulness and his solution to it. So I'm going to share that with you now. So there's the Cookie Monster saying, today me will live in the moment unless it's unpleasant, in which case me will eat a cookie. Now, here's one of our genuine dilemmas in mindfulness. Actually, we can get better at mindfulness, and then as we notice difficult stuff, if we don't attend to other things and work differently on other things, we can just end up getting more avoidant. We notice horrible stuff, and run away from it and get ourselves into trouble in different ways. I'm not saying eating a cookie is a bad thing, but eating too many cookies can certainly be a bad thing. And if we're going through a difficult time in life, then just loading up on the cookies, probably not ideal. So that's when we get to this other thing I wanted to spend, just a little time on, which is acceptance. Now, I'm not talking here about acceptance in the sense of like accepting a diagnosis, accepting the reality of this situation. That is one way that people use the word. It's a perfectly legitimate way to use it. I'm certainly not using it in the sense of giving up, not trying to change things at all. Here, the bit that links with the mindfulness is acceptance of the presence of difficult thoughts and feelings. The fact that difficult thoughts and feelings are showing up and they are here at the moment. And the reason, and now, of course, we kind of feel like we'd rather not have them. But that's a kind of losing game. And why? Well, because feelings are natural. Like they're part of all of our lives. Now, some of you might recognize where those pictures come from. They come from the Pixar movie called Inside Out. If you've not seen it, I highly recommend you see it. It's a very, very good movie. But I'm not going to lose ourselves in the plot of that, but central to it, we're following a young girl around who has all these strong feelings inside her head, and the feelings have become characters that we can see and hear talk. But the point right from the start of it is that these feelings are there for a reason. Fear's there to try and keep us safe. Anger's there to try and react to injustice and unfairness. Disgust is there to try and stop ourselves being poisoned. So our feelings are there for a reason. So we can't hope not to have feelings. And some difficult thoughts are equally natural. You've got to remember, our mind, it's a part of our mind's job to look out for dangers ahead, things we could do, solve problems that come up, notice things that have disappeared from our lives. That's part of our mind's job. So we're bound to have things like worries, doubts about ourselves, painful memories. How can we not? They aren't the problem. The feelings and those thoughts are not in themselves a problem from this way of looking at it, right? What is the problem is how we react to them. So when those things inevitably show up, if we react by giving up on stuff, getting caught up in our thoughts and lost in the middle of them, dwelling on the past or future, trying to problem solve things that can't be solved, avoiding things that make us feel bad, that's going to cause far more disruption in our lives than having this feeling or having that thought. The fact that we're reacting to it this way is causing difficulty. If we're more able to accept them being present and not let them take over, we're going to do better. Because the thing is, the more we try and get rid of or argue against our thoughts and feelings, the stronger they tend to get. Okay? If you're not sure about that, I'll give you a practical demonstration, okay? For the next 10 seconds, for whatever you do not think about a pink elephant. You can think about anything else in the whole world, but do not think about a pink elephant dancing around in a ballet dress. No pink elephants whatsoever. Okay, now, most people will end up thinking about pink elephant. The harder they try not to, the more it appears. Some of you might have managed not to. My bet is you filled your head with something else. And as soon as you stop that, it's pink elephants all the way down. And we know this because there's a huge body of research on it. We don't talk about pink elephants now, we talk about white bear. So if you were interested in, have I got evidence for this? If you Googled white bear suppression test, there's a whole literature on what you do when you tell people what happens when people try not to think about a white bear. So trying to push, and it's something as silly as a pink elephant. Okay, that's fine. But what if it is, what if my condition gets worse? What if I'm not already a wheelchair user, what if I become a wheelchair user? What if I can't work anymore? Now, those are really important thoughts, and they deserve some thought. But if they keep pushing in and keep pushing in, if our response to them is to try and go, la, 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 I'm not thinking about you, what's going to happen? Like with the white bear, it's going to be there stronger and stronger and stronger. So trying to push it out doesn't matter. And equally, trying to force yourself not to have it, an emotion. So if you were really anxious, say, anxious perhaps because I put a gun to your head, and then I said, I'm going to shoot you unless you calm down. I'm going to shoot you unless you stop being anxious. What's going to happen? I don't think you're going to get any calmer. I think you'll get more and more scared. Even though your life might depend on it, you'll get more and more scared. So we can't force thoughts out successfully just because we want to. We can't force emotions out. And sometimes the more we try and fix them, the stronger and stronger they get. So that's why we say kind of acceptance is an alternative. What we're trying to do is make room for those difficult thoughts and feelings. Say, yeah, I'm bound to have this thought, I'm bound to have this feeling, but I'm not letting you take over. I'm not letting you run the show. And guess what? Mindfulness is really good at that. It's a really good technique for helping you learn to do that. Why? Because you've now spent quite a bit of time sitting there, focusing on your breathing, say, and then this thought has come in saying, what if I get iller? And what we've learned to do is say, oh, that's what I'm thinking. There's that thought. Okay, back to my breath. Can you see how that's kind of the same thing? The mindfulness can help build the acceptance. And this other thing I mentioned to you, acceptance and commitment therapy, adds other techniques as well. There's loads of other ways of trying to not let the thoughts take over. And I'll point you towards those things. Okay. Nearly at an end, don't mind, don't worry, we're nearly there. You'll soon be able to kind of rest and not have your mind crammed full of this stuff. There's one last bit I want to add to the picture. Okay, and that's this. Values. Because if the goal of all of this isn't to get rid of our emotional suffering, isn't to get rid of difficult thoughts and feelings, well, what is it all for? What is the point? Well, in this approach, I've strayed off pure mindfulness now, and I'm into this acceptance and commitment therapy bit. What we would say is the goal isn't to live a life where you're never scared, never sad, never have a difficult thought, happy all the time, because that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. What we can have is a life with some fulfillment in it, where we feel we're doing stuff that really matters to us. So we'd say a life well lived is a life lived according to your values. Okay, so what am I meaning by values? Okay, so I'm going to ask you questions. Again, the format here, I can't really take your answers to it, but just answer it inside your head. So here's my first question. Who matters most to you in the world? Right, so think of a person. Now, I'm not asking you to choose between two children or your partner or your dog. Just somebody who really, really matters to you in your life. Hold them. We're not going to do anything awful, don't we? Just hold them in your head, in your heart. Right. Now, here's the second question. How do you want to be in your dealings with them? How do you want to be towards them? And if we were just in a situation of a conversation, I'd be asking for it in single words. And I know what I'd hear. I would hear people say things like, I want to be loving towards them, or I want to be supportive. I want to be kind. I want to be reliable. Okay. Those are the things that you think, if actually I was like that, like this all the time, that would feel right. That's who I want to be. That's what we mean. That's exactly what we mean by values. So they're in this way of doing stuff. Values are what we want to stand for in life, how we want to behave, the sort of person we want to be, what sort of strengths and qualities we want to develop. They can kind of become compass directions to us. They can help us choose which way to act when we're dealing with things. The ends in themselves, we're not doing it in order to gain success or wealth or praise. We're doing it because it feels right to us. You know, I want to be a reliable person, not because everybody will say, wow, you're great, you're so reliable, but because I don't want to be unreliable. This is the person I want to be, or I want to be a loving person. Now, the thing about values is they're different for different people. There's lots of stuff that actually we do probably most of us share, but everybody's, the things that matter most to people kind of varies a little bit. So, you know, here's some other examples: being caring, being loyal, dependable, helping people in need, being creative, being curious, promoting justice and fairness, appreciating beauty. So, you know, look at creative. That's not that important to some people, and it's really, really important to some other people. So there's no right or wrong values here. There's just the ways we want to be. But when we act on our values and we notice we're acting on them, that's when we get a bit more sense of purpose and fulfillment in our lives. It doesn't always lead straight to happiness, because sometimes these lead us to doing difficult things. So being caring for somebody who's very poorly isn't all about happiness, is it? You know that. You've been through this. You've either cared for others or you've been on the receiving end of care. It's not just about standard happiness, smiley happiness, but it's sometimes the most important thing you do and the most fulfilling thing you do, even though it might be quite sad. And that's the currency: fulfillment, vitality, rather than happiness in the sense of euphoria. So when we act on our values, we do things that fit in with them, even when it's difficult. What's going to happen? Well, difficult thoughts and feelings will show up. So if any of you have been in the position of being a carer for somebody else with a health problem, say, part of that experience is self-doubt or frustration or tiredness. So you do this thing that's really important, difficult thoughts and feelings show up. You still want to do it, but you've got to deal with all that stuff. I'm not good enough to be a carer. Is this ever going to end? Oh, I felt cross at them yesterday, and that's not fair. We've got to deal with all that. And that's where this mindfulness and acceptance stuff can help us. We live by values, but the mindfulness and acceptance helps us in that direction. So it's kind of like a triangle of three things. Bottom right is this values bit, knowing what matters to you and acting on it. Bottom left is making room for the difficult thoughts and feelings that show up without getting into a fight with them and without trying to hide from them and without getting all tangled up in them. And what really helps you with that is the stuff at the top, being aware of what's happening inside of you and around you. So that's kind of like a triangle that we have, particularly this acceptance and commitment therapy model of it. But can you see how the mindfulness bit is kind of like a pivot in the whole thing, is a central bit. Okay, I realize I've talked a lot. I wanted to drop in that little exercise, so it wasn't just talking about it. You got a chance to have a little feel of it. That's pretty much at the end of what I was going to say. If you want to learn more, then what we've got here on the pure mindfulness side of it, one of the organizations that's really helped develop the mindfulness stuff in the last 10 years or so, particularly for people with physical health problems, is an organization called Breathworks. It's a British-based one. And so if you went on YouTube and you searched Breathworks mindfulness, then you'll see lots of videos from them explaining stuff or practice. You know, like the exercise I did with you, there'll be loads of really good ones of those. If you're somebody who really likes to read a whole book about something, then the person who founded it, Vidya Mala Birch, she wrote co-wrote Mindfulness for Health. So that if you're a whole book kind of person, there's there. This acceptance and commitment therapy stuff, okay, I've put a little plug in for my book, not because I'm particularly, you know, trying to prompt you to buy it. You know, never forget you can still normally order these things from the library, but because that does apply all this stuff very directly to physical health problems. But you don't need to read a book, right? There's again loads of stuff for free on the internet, and a colleague of mine, David Galanders, did some short videos explaining this for a charity for young arthritis sufferers called Arthur's Seat, because it's based in Edinburgh. So if you searched Galanders Acceptance Arthur or follow that link, that'll get you to those videos as well. Okay, with that, I will shut up and just take us back to the title slide so we're not too distracted. And allow myself to open the chat channel for if there are any questions.